The phone rang at 2:47 a.m. The sound pierced my eardrums, painful. The room was pitch dark. The only light came from the green LED glow of the alarm clock blinking. 2:47, the kind of hour when people only call each other because someone has just taken their last breath. I picked up the phone. On the other end was the sound of hurried breathing. It was Dr. Miller from the county medical center. His voice was trembling. "Arthur, you need to get here right now. Christian has been in a serious car accident. But this isn't a normal accident. You have to come alone. Don't tell Claire. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab a glass of water, a few snacks, get comfortable, and remember this: the people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing, they simply chose not to." Leave a comment with the number 1 so we can continue the story, and hit subscribe. You're going to enjoy this one. My name is Arthur. I'm 69 years old. For the past 8 years I've had to play the role of a stubborn old father, a senile old man in everyone's eyes. All because of one person. Christian, my perfect son-in-law. I had been suspicious of him for 8 years, but I never imagined the truth would be this disgusting. I remember clearly the day he entered our family. He was frighteningly smooth. He wore polished suede shoes, and a smile was always on his face. Christian knew my wife liked carnations. He bought them every week. He knew my daughter Claire liked toast with the edges burned. He made it for her every morning. He even spent an entire week building a wooden swing in the yard for my 2 grandchildren. Before my wife passed away, she held my hand and told me that Claire was lucky to have Christian, but I didn't think so. I could smell the phoniness behind his excessive compliments. The instincts of a man who had spent half his life navigating the world told me that this guy wasn't normal. The way he looked at Claire wasn't love. It was the look of a hunter staring at a fat piece of prey. He used sweetness to isolate Claire. He gradually drove my daughter away from me. Claire thought I was biased. She believed I was jealous of her happiness. Every time I visited their house, Christian welcomed me with a warm smile. But the moment Claire turned her back, his expression changed. Cold, defiant. He quietly purchased multi-million-dollar life insurance policies for Claire. He did it legally and discreetly under the guise of worrying about the family's future. On one side was my daughter's pure, blind love. On the other was the cold, ruthless calculation of a venomous snake. After I finished speaking with Dr. Miller, I felt that something terrible was happening. I hurriedly grabbed my truck keys. Outside, the rain was starting to pour. The 3-mile drive from my house to the hospital had never felt so long. The windshield wipers on the pickup truck clattered through the night rain. The 3-mile drive passed in a frightening silence. I gripped the steering wheel tightly. My mind was in turmoil. The county medical center appeared beneath the dim glow of neon lights. The strong smell of disinfectant hit my nose the moment I stepped through the glass doors. The hallway was deserted. Only the heavy sound of my footsteps echoed across the tiled floor as I headed toward the emergency room. Dr. Miller was waiting in a dark corner at the end of the corridor. His face was pale. He wasn't wearing a white lab coat, but a dark blue surgical uniform soaked with sweat. When he saw me, Miller motioned with his hand. He didn't say a word. He led me into a small office beside the recovery room. Miller carefully locked the door. He pulled the curtains shut. This level of caution made my heart pound. I looked through the small window into the room across the hall. Christian was lying in a hospital bed. His face was covered with scratches. He breathed weakly through an oxygen mask. Wires and machines surrounded him, beeping steadily. The man who was always polished and confident now looked miserable. But I felt no sympathy. I felt overwhelming unease. Miller turned and looked me straight in the eyes. He lowered his voice to the barest whisper. "Christian wasn't injured from the crash itself, Arthur. His vehicle went into the drainage ditch because he lost consciousness beforehand. I ran blood tests on him before taking him into surgery." Miller paused for a moment. He handed me a test report. There was a large amount of thallium poison in his bloodstream. This type of poison accumulates slowly. It destroys the nervous system. Someone has been putting it in his food for weeks. A sudden chill ran down my spine. Who would want to harm my son-in-law? Did he have enemies? Dr. Miller leaned close to my ear. His words cut through the last of my composure like a knife. "Christian isn't the only victim, Arthur. He was poisoned by his own accomplices to eliminate loose ends after a failed operation." Before he passed out, he muttered something. "You need to go home immediately." Your daughter and your grandchildren are in danger. I stood frozen. My head was spinning. Who were Christian's accomplices? Why were Claire and the children in danger when Christian was lying here? Miller said nothing more. He pressed a thick brown manila envelope sealed with black tape into my hand. He told me to read it in my truck and act immediately before it was too late. I burst out of the hospital into the pouring rain. The truck door slammed shut behind me. Rain hammered against the roof like war drums. Inside the cramped cab, I gasped for breath. My trembling hands tore through the black tape sealing the manila envelope. The smell of old paper mixed with the scent of damp leather. I switched on the truck's dim overhead light. The documents inside came into view. My stomach twisted. The first ID photograph was Christian's face, but the bold name printed beneath it was not Christian. It was Raymond Vance. He was a professional con artist, a devil disguised as a man who was quietly being investigated by the FBI. My eyes locked onto the densely packed lines of text. This was not his first marriage. Before Claire, he had already had 2 wives. Both of those unfortunate women had died in unexpected accidents only a few years after marrying him. One had fallen down a staircase. The other had suffered severe food poisoning. And what was the most disgusting thing they had in common? The moment they were gone, Raymond Vance consistently collected enormous life insurance payouts. His first 2 schemes had earned him nearly $4 million. My blood boiled. My rage reached its peak when I turned to the final page. It was a copy of Claire's most recent life insurance policy. The activation date for the payout clause was next week. The amount placed on my daughter's life was $6 million. He had planned to make Claire his 3rd unfortunate wife. He intended to trade my daughter's life for his own wealth. I slammed my fist into the steering wheel. The horn blared through the darkness of the night. I hated myself for not being more forceful. I hated myself for allowing my daughter to live with a venomous snake for 8 years. But the most frightening part was still to come. Among the police investigation files was a small handwritten note. It was a list of Raymond's accomplices. He had never acted alone. In the previous 2 cases, a woman had always appeared posing as a relative, helping him arrange the funerals and dispose of the victim's assets. I looked at the name circled in red on the page. My legs went weak. That woman had moved to our town only 3 weeks earlier. She was staying in Claire's house right now. I stared at the name circled in red ink on the document. Rachel, the woman Christian had always introduced as his poor biological sister, who had come from their hometown to the county for medical treatment. I crumpled the paper in my hand. Her real name was Rebecca Shaw, a professional con artist who was being aggressively pursued by federal authorities. This venomous snake had quietly slithered into my daughter's home 3 weeks earlier. Miller's warning echoed in my ears like a clap of thunder. Now I understood everything. Christian had not been poisoned by some distant enemy. His lover, Rebecca, had poisoned him so she could claim Claire's $6 million insurance payout without having to share a cent. If Christian fell, the plan to destroy Claire would move forward even faster. Rebecca had to erase every trace before the police caught her scent. I glanced at the clock on the pickup truck's dashboard. 3:15 a.m. Claire was still at the hospital's intensive care unit, staying by her worthless husband's side. That meant the isolated house at the edge of the woods contained only Rebecca and my 2 young grandchildren. Noah was only 4 years old and sensitive little Lily was 6. They were sleeping peacefully in their room. They had no idea they were living under the same roof as a dangerous criminal. I slammed my foot down on the accelerator. The old pickup roared and shot forward through the heavy rain. My heart pounded as though it were trying to burst from my chest. I had less than 20 minutes to race against death. The thought of what Rebecca might do to those 2 children drove me mad. The false, sweet words she had spoken while pouring tea for me the week before flashed through my mind. Her voice had been gentle, but her eyes had been cold and completely devoid of emotion. Claire's house came into view at the end of the sloping road. Every light in the house was off. Only a faint light flickered once on the 2nd floor, before abruptly disappearing. It was my grandchildren's bedroom. What was Rebecca doing there at this hour? I pulled my truck over to the side of the road a short distance from the house. I switched off the headlights. I didn't want the sound of the engine to alert whoever was inside. Rain poured down in sheets, blurring the windshield. I pulled out my phone and dialed Hank, my brother, a former Marine. Hank answered on the first ring. His voice was alert. I kept it brief. Get to Claire's house right now. Bring something to defend yourself with. The snake is inside the house with the children. I stepped out of the truck and waded through the muddy ground. An icy wind slammed into my face. I made my way toward the back door of the house. The spare key was still beneath the carnation planter. I slid it into the lock and turned it gently. The door opened without a sound. Inside, everything was dark. The scent of maple syrup from the children's dinner still lingered faintly in the air. But now it was overwhelmed by another smell, Rebecca's strong, cheap perfume. I moved quietly through the living room. The wooden floor occasionally creaked beneath my feet. As I reached the bottom of the staircase, I suddenly heard light footsteps descending from upstairs. I slipped into the shadows beneath the staircase. The beam from Rebecca's phone flashlight swept across the steps. She was coming down. In her hand was a large travel bag. Under the dim light, her face looked frighteningly cold. There wasn't the slightest trace of concern on the face of someone who had just committed murder. Her expression was flat. A terrifying silence hung over the house. Rebecca stopped on the final step. She seemed to sense that something was wrong. She switched off the flashlight. The house plunged into complete darkness. I could hear her steady breathing. My heart hammered against my ribs like a drum. I had to act before she discovered me. I stepped out of the shadows. Standing directly in the only path leading to the front door, I raised my small flashlight and shined it straight into her face. Rebecca flinched and took a step backward, but she quickly regained her composure. A fake smile appeared on her lips. "Mr. Arthur, you startled me. What are you doing here at this hour?" I stared at the travel bag in her hand. My stomach tightened. I wondered where my grandchildren were, and why there was a dark red stain on her hand that had only just dried. I stared at the dark red stain on the back of Rebecca's hand. My voice dropped hard and sharp. "Where are the children?" Rebecca subtly moved her hand behind her back. The fake smile remained on her lips. "They're asleep upstairs, Arthur. Christian was in an accident, so I'm packing a few things to take to the hospital. I need to leave right away." She took a step forward, trying to slip past me and reach the door. I didn't move. I stood firm in front of the entrance like an old tree trunk rooted to the floor. I growled each word. "Get out of my way." Rebecca stopped smiling. Her face hardened. The cold, flat eyes of a killer revealed their full cruelty. She lowered the travel bag onto the wooden floor. Slowly, her right hand slipped into the pocket of her jacket. I knew what was in there. A scalpel, or another vial of poison. The air froze. A suffocating tension filled the room. I was a 69-year-old man, but at that moment I felt no fear, only the instincts of a father and grandfather pushed into a corner. I prepared to throw myself at her. Then a powerful beam of headlights swept across the living room windows. The screech of hard braking echoed outside. Heavy footsteps thundered toward the back door. Hank had arrived. Realizing she had lost her advantage, Rebecca suddenly lunged straight at me. She slammed into me with all her strength, trying to force a path to freedom. I braced myself against the impact. This 69-year-old father gathered every ounce of strength he had left and shoved her hard. Rebecca crashed onto the floor. Her travel bag flew from her hand. Small glass bottles inside burst apart across the wooden boards. The back door flew open. Hank stormed inside. He pinned Rebecca to the floor almost immediately. I didn't wait to see more. I raced up the stairs. I pushed open the children's bedroom door. Noah and Lily were still lying in their beds. I scooped both grandchildren into my arms. Then I hurried downstairs. I carried them outside, placed them on the back seat of my truck, and disappeared into the rain before Rebecca had any chance to regain control of the situation. I looked at the children through the rearview mirror. They were still asleep. The truck sped through the darkness toward the county sheriff's office. If you've stayed with this story all the way to this point, then it has probably stirred some emotions in you. Please help us with one small and quick thing: like and subscribe. Leave a comment with the number 5 so I know you've made it this far, and predict how you think the story will end to see if you're right. Many people watch without doing that, but it costs you nothing and means a great deal to us. I knew I had saved the children, but I never expected that the next phone call from Claire would push me into another bitterness far deeper than anything I had faced so far. My truck came to a stop in front of the county sheriff's office, just as dawn was breaking. The rain had finally eased. Only tiny droplets remained clinging to the windshield. Hank escorted Rebecca inside. Her head hung low. the cold steel handcuffs locked around her wrists. Every piece of evidence from the travel bag had been confiscated. The small glass containers filled with thallium poison and the forged documents were impossible to explain away. At the same time, 2 patrol cars were dispatched to the county medical center. Christian had regained consciousness after surgery, but the people waiting for him were not his wife and family. 2 armed police officers stood guard beside his hospital bed. An emergency arrest warrant was carried out immediately. The mask of the perfect son-in-law finally shattered. He lay motionless, staring helplessly at the hospital ceiling. A sense of satisfaction rose within me. Justice had begun to move. The guilty would finally pay for their crimes. But that feeling did not last long. I was sitting on a wooden bench in the hallway of the sheriff's office. My 2 grandchildren had been taken to a temporary restroom. Suddenly the phone in my jacket pocket began vibrating. It was Claire. I answered immediately. There was no crying on the other end. Only a voice so cold it was frightening. Claire shouted into the phone, "Are you satisfied now, Dad? You've hated Christian for 8 years. Now he's lying there close to death, and you're still accusing him of things. You even kidnapped my children. I never want to see your face again." The long tone of the disconnected call extinguished every bit of hope I had left. Christian's lies had poisoned her mind too deeply. Claire refused to believe a single word from the police. She believed I had orchestrated this entire situation to destroy her happiness. Bitterness lodged in my throat. I stared out the window. The morning was bright, but inside everything felt dark. What could I possibly do to wake my daughter up when she was the one signing her own death warrant? The next 9 days passed in a terrifying silence. They were the longest and most painful days of my 69 years. Claire cut off all contact. She refused to answer my calls. She locked the doors of the isolated house and would not allow me inside. She took the children and left them with a friend. In her eyes, I was nothing more than a jealous old man driven insane by resentment and determined to destroy her family. The bitterness consumed me every night. I sat alone in my empty house. The ticking of the furnace sounded like the countdown of a slow-burning bomb. Sometimes I would stare out at the empty yard. The wooden swing Christian had built with his own hands still stood there. His deception had been so complete that it turned me into the villain in my daughter's eyes. The innocent man was suspected. The killer was pitied. The county police repeatedly asked Claire to come in for interviews and review the evidence. Each time she refused to accept the truth. She insisted that the documents identifying Christian as Raymond Vance were fabricated. She believed Christian had been framed. Watching my daughter sink deeper into denial, I could do nothing but clutch my chest in helplessness. This pain was worse than any physical wound. I did not blame Claire. I only felt sorry for her. She had spent 8 years of her youth loving a ghost. She had given children to a man who was willing to schedule her death in exchange for insurance money. That truth was too cruel for any wife to accept overnight. I was willing to endure her hatred. As long as Claire and the children remained safe under the protection of the law, I could bear it. On the evening of the 10th day, just as darkness was settling in, I sat at the dining table, staring blankly into space. A familiar car pulled into the driveway. Then came the sound of unsteady footsteps approaching the front door. The wooden door opened. Claire stood there. Her hair was disheveled. Her eyes were swollen from days of endless crying. In her hands was a thick stack of documents that the police had recently released after completing the preliminary investigation. She looked at me. A tear rolled down her gaunt cheek. This time she didn't scream. She pressed her lips together, walked toward me, and spoke a single sentence that left me completely stunned. Claire looked directly into my eyes. Her voice trembled. "I've read everything." Those words were like a key unlocking the crushing weight that had been pressing against my chest for the past 9 days. Claire threw her arms around me. She sobbed like a child. Tears of awakening and overwhelming regret poured out of her. I gently patted my daughter's thin back. The greatest relief for a father is not hearing an apology. It is knowing that his child has finally seen the light. 3 months later, the official trial took place in federal court. The courtroom was packed. Christian's mask was completely stripped away under the light of justice. He entered the defendant's stand wearing an orange prison uniform. Gone was the polished appearance of the perfect son-in-law. All that remained was the cowardice of a criminal, cornered by his own crimes. Rebecca Shaw stood beside him, her face cold and utterly without remorse. Justice was carried out thoroughly and with complete satisfaction. Christian was sentenced to 2 life terms without parole for murder and insurance fraud. Rebecca received a 35-year prison sentence for poisoning her accomplice and attempted murder. The moment the judge's gavel struck to end the proceedings, the entire courtroom seemed to erupt. The sweetest form of revenge is not violence. It is bringing crime into the light of the law. From the back row, a middle-aged American family approached me. They were relatives of the first wife Christian had murdered years earlier. The gray-haired man gripped my hand tightly. A tear rolled down his cheek. He thanked me for having the courage to see the fight through to the end, allowing his family's pain to finally begin healing. It was a handshake of understanding between fathers who had both known loss. I led Claire and my 2 grandchildren out of the courthouse. The midday sun shone brightly across the stone steps. It seemed as though everything had finally come to a proper end. But as we climbed into my truck, I noticed something strange. A stampless envelope was resting neatly on the driver's seat. It had appeared there without anyone noticing. I picked up the stampless envelope. Inside was only a single printed sentence. The case has been closed, but the lesson will remain. It was a message from the insurance law firm expressing gratitude for my family's vigilance. I smiled with relief and tossed the note aside. The truck engine started, and I headed home. 2 years passed in the blink of an eye. The isolated house at the edge of the forest was now filled with laughter. The old nightmare had completely faded into the past. Claire had found the strength to overcome the greatest emotional trauma of her life and return to medicine. She was now a dedicated physician at the county hospital. Noah and Lily had grown so much. They ran across the yard playing on a new swing that Hank and I had built with our own hands. Today was Thanksgiving. The house felt unusually warm. The aroma of roasted turkey blended with the sweet scent of maple syrup from the desserts. The porch light illuminated the small yard outside. I sat at the dining table, watching my daughter happily ladle soup for her children. A deep sense of peace settled over me. After weathering the storms of life, a 69-year-old man like me has only 3 lessons to share. The first is kindness. Always protect the people you love without conditions. The second is awareness. Do not allow sweet words to blind you to harsh truths. The last is perseverance. Trust your instincts and have the courage to see the fight through when justice needs defending. Do not be afraid of looking foolish. Be afraid of staying silent when you know you are right. Thank you for joining Dad's Real Life Revenge. Don't forget to share your own story in the comments and subscribe so you won't miss the next hard-earned lesson. I'll see you in the next video. Dinner's ready. Claire looked at me with a warm smile. Dad, come eat before it gets cold. I stood and walked toward the table, filled with laughter. The porch light still shone brightly, just like the courage of a father that had never gone out.